Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Gainesville PowerShell meetup that's virtual and in person in quite a long time. We had a successful social last month, which was awesome. I think we had like almost 20 people come out and get to know each other and had great conversations, learned a lot of things, made some cool friends, and we're looking forward to continue building something cool with the Gainesville PowerShell user group, both with our friends in the Gainesville area and also virtually with other people who are interested in learning and talking about more PowerShell. And today, to kick us off, we have a GNVPSUG original speaker, which is Chris Masters, and he'll be talking about the PowerShell pipeline and all kinds of awesome stuff related to that. I don't think there's any other things I need to address before we get into this. So take it away, Chris.
Alrighty, thanks, Andrew. Give me just a sec to get this going and share my screen. All right. Can you see that okay?
Looks good.
Looks good. Awesome. All right, everybody. Welcome to PowerShell for Plumbers, where we'll be exploring the basics of using the PowerShell pipeline. I wish I had a bunch of witticisms to go along with that. I had some plans, but unfortunately, this is where they end with the pipe there. So my goal after this talk is that you'll be able to start using the pipeline with just common commandlets and in your own scripts and functions. So, hi, my name's Chris. I've been using PowerShell since 2007. I work in the financial sector and I don't really have any creds, but I do use PowerShell a good bit. But that doesn't, just caveat, I could be wrong on something. With the outline, I'm going to make some assumptions. Like I assume you're already familiar with PowerShell and that you know everything in PowerShell is an object. So today we'll go over what the pipeline is and then how to use it. And then maybe some ideas of when and why you should use it or would use it. And then we'll finish things up with where you can find out more. We'll start with the definition here. And this came straight from the Get Help on PowerShell. So the pipeline is a series of commands connected by the pipe operator. So that's how we call the pipeline or send data through it. Each pipeline operator sends the results of the preceding command to the next command. And it's really important to know that in a pipeline, the commands are processed in order from left to right. Like command 1 sends its output to command 2 to command 3, so on and so forth. So before we jump right into it, just want to make sure that we go over objects just a little bit, and but we won't spend a lot of time here. For the lesson, it's just important to know that objects have members like properties, events, methods, etc. And I am not much for PowerPoint, so let's jump into some code. Give me just a second to change my screen here. All right, can you see that okay? Awesome. All right, so these are just some variables to have me something to show here. So each object that we got has some members. I just want to show you some of these members. And let's just take a look. These are the three things we'll be working with today. We'll be using services, processes, and some files, and do a little bit of examples with each. So what's important to note from this is that these properties have the names, and these names are what we're going to use in some examples here to explain why and how to send the output into the next command. So one sec here. Let's go right into some, well, I guess I do want to show you a couple more things. So some things to take note of on these names is whenever we have like names, and that'll come up just a little bit later. But in some of these, we actually have some very similar property names. Let's jump into some services and make some more variables here. So when we're working with the pipeline, we use that pipe character, which allows us to send the output from our command. Like for instance, the service command, which I think is like the most popular example out there, right? Is to send get service to say start or stop a service, and we'll do some of that real quick. So something to note as well is that some automatic variables, we'll talk about those in just a little bit whenever we get into some functions here. Let's explain how populating the parameters from the pipelines works. Let me run this real quick. What we got here is just from the get help on the get service parameter. We're looking at the actual parameters that accept pipeline input. I'm not really going to get into the difference between by val and by property name, but what I will say is that when you pass the input via the pipeline, the next command needs that parameter. These will accept that. For instance, if you passed something in, if you had something that had that common parameter name of computer name or name, that gets passed to the next. Let me see if I can do an example here to maybe close the loop. I'm just going to make a PS custom object with these two parameter names. You'll see the computer name accepts pipeline, and so does name. Now, I'm not connected to anything special. I'm just running on my local computer here, so we'll leave the computer name as localhost. This custom variable that I'm hoping everybody's familiar with is just, it's a PS custom object, but it acts kind of like a hash table. Now, if I go through here and send that data to get service, it now took this data that's in here, passed it to the get service without me needing to do, say, for instance, dash computer name or dash name for the service, and now we end up with results on the pipeline. I did say I wasn't going to mention the difference between by property name, which is by calling the property name. But just to see this in a much simpler form, we can do the same exact thing with just sending the service name through. Let me show this one more time so that we can kind of understand that a little bit. So in this name, you'll see that it's position 0, and with that, we got a by value, which basically means that you don't need to send the property name. So we can essentially get the exact same output here without sending the computer name, but this is just localhost. And we now send this value through to get service. Now we got the service. Let's do some additional examples here.
So quick question about that.
Yeah,
that last one.
absolutely.
So that's by value. So I guess by value, like that string to the left, that's the value, I guess. So the value type of string maps up to a parameter. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, let me type this out for you. So if you've ever typed something out like get service, and then instead of doing dash name, which is what you would normally do, it's position 0. So WUAUSERV. It's exactly like doing that. You basically just passed it through the pipeline. So instead of typing in that positional parameter out to the right, you're just passing it in through the pipeline. So that's a string value. We can see from the help that the name actually takes a string value here, and it can, of course, obviously can accept it from the pipeline or just right there in position 0. I don't want to get hung up on the position 0, but that's essentially what you're doing there is typing it in and just passing it.
Cool.
As if you were just typing it. Yep.
I like that distinction because it's just interesting. You don't have to construct the object and give it a property name. You just it kind of maps up differently. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do a little better with feedback instead of just sitting here and kind of preaching this stuff. So feel free to stop me whenever. And if you don't get something, totally happy to go backwards. I think we're making pretty decent time here. All right, let's see here. Okay, yeah, this is my next file. So I'm sure people have used for each object and you've passed in or you've taken advantage of this little $_ This is the automatic variable that you get. For instance, whenever we'll do an example on processes now instead of services, and we'll string some things together here. I'm sorry. Let me back up just a second here. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I felt like I missed something. My font's so big, I didn't even realize I had more stuff down there. Let's go through some chaining here real quick. So we'll chain some stuff together. We have our custom object still here, and this time we're going to take this and we're going to send that to get service. So we've seen this output already. We get the service. We can still pass that further down because this is still getting and returning an object, and it has these values in it. So we can actually pass that on through to start service. So we can chain this along, wait for the service to start, and now we have started a service. You can further pass that along. So let's say that you have some output here and you want to modify the output. So we have some select objects. I'm sure people are familiar with select and format. Let's try some of those. We can continue this chain on and on and on. Now it's running. Now we just get display name and the status as opposed to name and display name and status. Just a simple way to manipulate it. And let's say we wanted to get that in list format. We can further send it through the pipeline and get it in list format. So these things can be chained on until, I don't know if there's any limits to that. I'm sure there's some finite number of chains that you can do, but theoretically, I guess you could keep on going and going and going. let's say you wanted to scale something out. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just curious, what was the pass-through parameter you had on start service? What's the purpose of that?
So if you do start service, there isn't really any output. So the pass-through actually sends the output. So let's run it again. This is a good question. So you'll notice that this time, whenever we send the splat through to get service and then start service, there is no output. So in order to see that, you'd either need to do something like get service again to see that the state has changed, or you could simply do pass through, which gives you the that running data, or the data that would normally just end up quietly happening in the background.
That's nice. I've always actually, I think, probably done get service again after start service to check it. I didn't realize there's a pass-through argument there that could.
Yeah, so things that you'll see, this one's a common parameter, but it's certainly handy dandy whenever you're doing something that has an action to it, as opposed to getting. So if there is no output to the function that you're working with, you can do dash pass through to get the value back to give you the new status of whatever you took action on, as long as the command letter function supports that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So scaling. Let's say you have a big environment or an environment, and you want to see the services on multiple computers. Well, we can make an object here, and I don't know that unless you got questions on it. Basically, what we're doing is we're making an object here and converting this from CSV, which is basically just like importing a CSV. Some people work with those, right? With this, let's see what happens if we, unfortunately, I still just have the local host instead of a bunch of computers. And I just put some garbage in here for OS just to have something to mess with. Let's say that we wanted to, and obviously OS is not passed to the get service. So get service is going to ignore everything that doesn't match a parameter that it accepts from the pipeline. Everything else just kind of passes on through. Let's see what happens here. So, so basically I got my Windows Update services times 5 here, to where I basically ran get service against the local host, but this can scale. You could put multiple computer names in here, and then you can pass all this to the pipeline. So for instance, get service, and the way that the pipeline works, if you'll remember that it works from left to right, it also works in a serial fashion, and it almost will do like a for each for you. So everything that you pass through to it, if you passed, an object with a PS custom object with, say, for instance, 3 or 5 computer names to it, it's going to run the get service 5 times. So it's going to pass that through to the pipeline serially to the get service command, and then it will output for each. Let's see what else I got in here. What about dealing with disparate functions? So we've seen how easy the like stuff works, but what if you want to chain things together? I looked online before we did this, and I've seen a whole bunch of examples of basically people throwing get service to start service and stop service, but it works in that you match on the property name. So if you can set aside the fact that things need to be like, and you just need to figure out that the like property names is what matters, then now you can start seeing what your options are. So you can chain these things together. For instance, let's see what happens if we do get service and pass it to get process. Similar, but not exactly the same. This works. Sorry about that, y'all. Should turn that ringer off. So we can go through and let's dissect why that actually worked. So these commands have the name alias property in common. So if you were to let's see here, let's get help and let's take a look at this guy. So these have the name property in common. So the name from this one just so happens that there's a process named that. Now, this isn't always the case, right? But if you have a service and there's a process, it starts an executable with the exact same name as the service, you can pass that to get process. But it's just important to understand that. This doesn't work all the time. You need to know what you're working with. But if you understand what you're working with, then you can start chaining disparate commandlets and functions together. So we'll see that this one also accepts the name attribute, which is actually an alias for service name. And so on and so forth. Let's do another one. What if we wanted to pipe get process to get child item? I have Zoom running, obviously, because we're on Zoom here. And I actually have 3 executables running from Zoom. So let's say I just wanted to look at one of those. And then I want to pass this to get child item to see if there's a file involved. There is. There's the zoom.exe. And let's figure out why that worked. So these commands have the path property in common. So if you did get process zoom, get member, we'll see that this actually has the a script property of path from get process. Same thing in get child item. That's your default. This is your default or your positional parameter of path. So whenever you do a dir or ls or get child item or GCI, you type in a path on what you want to get. This get process has path and it passes it direct to get child item. So that's the way that can work. Any questions before we move on?
Hey, Chris, what was the dash first? Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Just for example's sake, like I was showing here, there's actually 3 Zooms running. We can take this out though. Let's say that we didn't want to do select first. Select first just picks the very first one that came through from the get process, but it's not necessary. So if we ran this and piped it through, it would actually just get zoom.exe 3 times. So yeah, that's all that is. This is just for show and also another pipe. So it's a good opportunity. And to also understand that get process is still sending the same object through. Even after you've selected it, it's still sending it through as the same object to get child item. Let's do some looping. The for each object that I almost started a little early on is where we use our automatic variables. This is where this comes in. So if you ever pipe something into for each object, the way that you work with it is $_ and that returns the entire object. You can also dot source the properties in order to extrapolate for certain things. Let's take a look at this one. So this one's going to do get process of the Zoom because it's a good example. We're already using Zoom. We're going to do a get child item, and then we already know that there's 3 of them. So basically what this does is it for each of the 3 get child items that came through, and then returns the full name. So if we did, let's say we did a get child item, and then we pop that, I'm sorry, I do shorthand whenever I'm typing. Get member, we'll see that full name is what we did, and that's what this dot full name is. So we got an entire object which has all of these members in it, and we just wanted to see the full name. So we printed $_dot full name to the screen. Something else is, if you've ever worked with for each object and you notice, you know, hey, how come the only thing that's left whenever I'm calling this automatic $_ is the very last thing that was ran. So what about the process? What happened to that guy? Does it just get thrown in the trash? It doesn't have to. Oh, one sec. I am not getting alerted on the chat. Bear with me.
I can read it to you if you want.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, I guess there were some questions, or
there's good stuff. I think probably keep going with what you're going on, and then we'll review it at the end because there's some cool little commands that probably build on what you're doing here.
Absolutely. So let's say that you wanted to hang on to that. Well, there's a way of doing that, and that is dash pipeline variable. So we can take that exact for each command up here and work with it just a little different. So let's say that we wanted to do the get process of Zoom again, and you know, we're doing that select object to where we have just the first object. We pipe it to the get child item, and then we run that through our for each. Well, now we have the option to identify or hang on to our initial stuff. With this pipeline variable, we'll make a variable that's called proc. So it won't be accessed through the $_. It'll be accessed via proc. And I'm sorry for, let me just do something. Ignore this, please. I'm just doing that to get rid of my stuff that watches and keeps me from making mistakes. This isn't really doing anything. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Okay. All right, so through our pipeline variable, there's a proc, and then we're going to do another pipeline variable of file. So even though that this one's going to be, if we remember, the last thing that hits the pipeline is $_, we're actually going to call this file. So in here, we'll see that we're going to put out the file name and the processor ID. New line is just for spacing. It's just for display purposes. Okay, so in here, we did our pipeline just like we did before, but this time what we're putting out is we accessed it differently. So instead of using $_ and having just the full name pipe out, we can now call that via proc ID, or I'm sorry, file.name. We can, or $_.name, we can do file.name. So this pipeline variable actually creates a variable for us to work with inside the for each object. And just to show you here, the Yep. So the $_ is still the last thing sent in through the pipeline. Any questions on that?
What's up with the zeros, the ones, the twos, the brackets, all that stuff with the string?
Oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done it that way. So these are using the format. You could, it's putting expandables inside of a non-expandable thing. I'm sorry, I can fix that real quick.
Okay, cool.
I'll
So it's
speak
just
to it
like
real
a
quick.
way
So
of,
it's a nifty way of doing string formatting. So, you know, some people know like you can do the dollar, you know, parentheses to put something in something, or you just do dollar variable to put something in. But if you have like a complicated thing, especially like this, it's really good with single quotes. Of like if you have stuff that already has a lot of brackets or already has a lot of dollar signs and you don't want to escape all that stuff, this is a really neat way where you basically just put the 2 braces and 0, braces and 1, braces 2, and then the -F, and then each item after that, like whatever that file name fills in the 0, and then the proc ID fills in the 1, and then the new line fills in the 2. So it's really helpful, especially like if you have a string that's like an error message or something that maybe already has a lot of brackets, braces, dollar signs in it, and trying to do all the backtick escapes and that kind of stuff just gets too confusing. You just put it in single quotes and do this nifty -F way.
yeah, I think I've heard it called .NET string notation in the past. But I guess the alternative to doing that would be to do what he's doing now, which is using sub expressions to like have the full variable name that he got from pipeline variable and then access the individual property. Cool.
Yeah, so that's all that is doing. There we go. Type it right. Yep, same output. Just putting these, put it in a different way. So yeah, just doing my strings a little different there. Sorry about that. So I guess how are we doing on time? Are we good, Andrew?
We're doing great. We're on your
Awesome.
time, man. Take your time.
Yeah. Righty. So how would you use this in your functions? So in order to start taking advantage of it yourselves in your functions, it's just simple as this. You make your function, and on your parameter, you do value from pipeline equals true. Now, whenever you do this, this is the by val thing. So this would not be by, property name of sending computer name to it. To do that, you would do value from pipeline by property name. And then you'd be able to specify your property name either from passing through or making your own PS custom object to send through it. So we can actually let's use our little script or function here. It doesn't do much. This thing is just for demonstration to write the output of the computer name that you pass through to it. So let's make some variables here, or an array of string, and we do our function and see what happens. Basically, exactly what you'd expect is a write output of your 3 different computer names in the array of computer names. Okay. Bear with me here just a second. There's another thing I wanted to go over, and that's the speed test thing. To kind of go into the idea, when would you use the pipeline and why? And to do that, I kind of have an example here which is going to do some speed test stuff to see how it compares to the other loops. So in this, we actually have the regular for each. We have for each piped, and then we have just for, and then like a while type loop. So your basic type loops here. And while this is running, basically what I'm doing is just some math that actually does nothing a million times. And with that, you'll see that the for each took 2 seconds. Well, for each piped took 7 seconds. And what we'll notice is that piped for each is the slowest. There's some overhead when it comes to sending stuff to the pipeline. So with that being said, the question would be raised, why would you, if it's the slowest, ever use the pipeline? Well, for small tasks, it's really great. It's super easy to chain things together, take the output from one and build it into the other. So you could save some typing. You could, you know, I would say that there's plenty of reasons for using it. So for instance, like, let's say that, say you only did it 1,000 times. Well, doing it 1,000 times, we're still dealing with, you know, 0.02 seconds. So you can see for smaller tasks, it's super great. The only time that I would say that you probably wouldn't want to use the pipeline is if you have some very intense scripts that do lots of data, lots of crunching, and there's a time factor involved. Other than that, the pipeline is absolutely good to go, in my opinion. That is. And I'm sure you could come up with plenty of other reasons of why to use it. But for instance, just stacking things together. If there's failures on the previous ones, you don't have to worry about the other ones running, things of that nature. So let's see if we can wrap this guy up. That's about what I had to show. So yeah. How awesome. You can find out more is there's always the get help about pipelines, and you can also find more on you know, online. Google it. And, you know, thanks for everybody. Thanks for Andrew for letting me do the talk. Thanks for Johnny, who actually gave me the topic, and my coworkers who picked out the name for it, and also my son who let me practice on him. And hopefully this didn't turn out too bad.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. That was awesome. I think we have a couple things in chat that we could kind of look at that Justin brought up that are pretty cool.
Yeah, that was great, Chris. Nice job.
Thanks. First time.
Yeah,
thanks, Chris. You could have fooled me. You're so calm and collected and just kind of like, this is what drives me crazy, is like I had to force myself to do one of my presentations like Jakob, because I'm just a mile a minute. I'm always impressed with people who can just kind of have just an easygoing demeanor when I'm just like, I want to tell you all the things. And you're just have such a great demeanor for presenting. I was impressed. Great job.
Yeah, exploding on the inside.
Awesome. Hey, wherever you need it to be. So.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah, I learned new things. That was awesome. I mentioned it in chat, but stringing together commands and playing around with for each object and like getting something to work when you have like 4 commands run together is just so much fun. Especially because you can do it once you kind of get used to how the pipeline works and stuff. You can kind of do it on the fly. It's really empowering, honestly. And that pipeline variable thing that you showed, I haven't really ever used that. I've like, it's there. Justin was saying it's on every single command. So I can definitely use that in my for each object loops.
Yeah, it's handy if you're chaining multiple things.
Yep. Awesome. Well, could you pull up the chat by chance?
Sure.
Because there's a cool little example that would be nice if you ran about the way, well, I guess Justin could probably speak to it better than me, but the way that like select object and group object process commands differently than a lot of other commands.
Yeah, let's see here. I am looking through the chat here for the specific thing you're talking about.
So, boom.
I'll bring it to the top. So there's the sort of the first example. And basically what I was showing is the difference is that when you run something, just an example of like typically with the pipeline, things run left to right, the first object to the next through the entire pipeline. So, you know, if you run that, you should see them kind of coming as this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. Although actually I forgot to put that in brackets, the last part. So it might not run quite right. Because that's going to be actually looking for a property, which is a different thing there. Slightly fixed.
Well,
at the end, sorry, at the end, the this is underscore needs to be in a script block. Because otherwise, basically, I'm telling it, hey, look for a property called this is 1, which obviously doesn't exist on the object. Okay, so you see how it comes in 1, 2, 3. Great, that stuff streams that way. But there are some commands, you know, that's what, if you ever look when you write a command, you know, you might be familiar with that begin, process, end. So the process part is where the pipeline stuff takes place. The begin happens once, and then the end is where things happen after the pipeline is complete. There are certain situations in a pipeline where you don't want to process things one at a time. You want to operate on the entire collection. And a good example of that is like select object. A select object and group object want to be able to like select first one. Like if you're doing select first 3, you have to be able to get everything coming into the pipeline, you know, before you can actually make that decision. So what they do is that basically in the process block, they're just doing a process where they're just collecting things into an array. And then once they got everything coming down the pipeline, then they act on it. So to demonstrate this, take that same command and just do an up arrow. And before the for each block, just put in select star. So before the pipe %, which is just shorthand for each. You could replace it. Actually, no, further over after the sleep one. Yeah. Yep, at the end of the script block. Nope. So we're just continuing the pipeline, but we're just inserting select. We're just showing an example of like, you know, doing a select. So after the brace, then do pipe select 1, pipe and for each. You see what I'm saying? Here, I'll put it. There you go. Yeah, just select star, which all that does is that without getting too complicated, is just taking everything in the pipeline and passing it back through, just as an example. So let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Oh, why did that actually? This might be a 5.1 thing. See, now I got to go test it on my 5.1. Sorry.
Yeah, this is 5.1 here.
Give me 1 second. Let me switch. See, I broke my own demo. Give me a second to try it. For each one. You have to do, okay. Oh, I know why. It's because it's not an actual object. Let's try. I think a better way to do this example. Let's do get process. So do get process and then do for each. So replace the 1.3 with get process. and then change the select to just select name.
So what, just name as the property name?
Yeah. You'll have to do git process. You can't use the shorthand, unfortunately, there. If you didn't know this, also in PowerShell, every command, if you don't, you can pretty much implicit, the git is implicit. So if you do just like process or object, the git will get added if it doesn't already exist as like an exe command. Yeah, my example is not working how I want it to. Let's try group here. Group is probably a better example. But so basically the idea is there are some commands that will collect everything in the pipeline and then run them at the end. So that, for instance, as you see, like in this case, like things are streaming in one at a time because we're just outputting it to the pipeline and then sleeping one, and it continues to process on that object. But you have something in between like group. Like if you have something that takes a long time, like it shows there, like the sleep one, it's going to take a long time because it's now got to wait for everything from that for each to show up into the command before it can actually do a group, because it's got to have all the information ahead of time. So if you change that into just group name is probably a better example. Yeah. So now in this case, you see stuff isn't streaming one at a time anymore. It's actually basically getting bottlenecked at the group, because group has to wait for everything to show up before it can be able to do its kind of grouping and then pass it to the next item with the parameter.
Yeah,
so just a little like
has to happen before render, right? As opposed to serial, because it has to take the entire object before it can group it. You can't sort a single or group a single, right?
Yeah, sort's another great example. I said select, but I meant sort. So sorry, yeah. So yeah, if you change that group to sort, that's probably a better example. So if you did the 1.3 and use sort, that should be fine. Or 1.3 and then sort descending. I'll put an example here real quick. Sorry. So I just put in the chat like the better example.
So yeah, this one will get stuck as well, right? So yeah, you got to wait for the whole thing before it can do certain actions.
Yeah. So just something to keep in mind if you're doing things that take a while, like if you're sending out to things to another computer and wait for it to come back, or other large things. Like if you have that piece in the middle and you're expecting to see the results on the screen as it goes, or expecting that to go to another command that's going to take a long time to process, keep that in mind, that if your command or whatever you're using does all its work in the end block, it's going to jam up that pipeline, so to speak, until it gets through that step. So that was just one of my little like pro tips that I totally have not been burned on, and hence why I bring it up here. It's never happened.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks.
Have you worked with the for each parallel in PowerShell 7 at all?
In 7, no.
Okay.
I've messed around with the parallel from workflows in 5, but didn't really mess with it a whole lot.
They're very painful. It's true. But
yeah.
And the reason they made for each parallel was because everybody who used workflows, the only thing they used it for was parallel. So they realized like we don't need to bring, and none of the workflow stuff came over into .NET Core. So they were like, well, we don't want to re-implement all this stuff, but most people only use workflows for parallel anyway, so we'll just make a command for it.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, I don't use it a lot either. I just went through going through a 7, what the differences are in, 5, 6 versus 7 plus. What I understand is that it puts it in its own thread.
Technically a run space, but yes. So the easy example would be, Chris, I don't know if you have a PowerShell 7 installed on your computer or not. If you could bring up a PowerShell 7 prompt like in VS Code or something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got that on here.
These examples take that same for each sleep one and then make it for each parallel. But yeah, Phil, what happens is that, yeah, it's basically automating. If you've ever used like Start Thread Job or the Posh RS Jobs modules, or you've ever actually like used the .NET commands to make run spaces, which is very painful if you're not used to that kind of a thing, for each parallel just automates that whole process. Basically, each item that comes down the pipeline, and it does the same thing. It will collect all the items first. And then what it'll do is, okay, for each of these items, I'm going to put it into a run space. And then whatever you put in your little script block is what goes into that run space. So it doesn't bring anything with it. You have to, that's one thing that throws people with for each parallel is like, it doesn't have any of your implicit state unless you use that special like using variable. So like if you've imported a module, you've got to import it again, kind of a deal. But what it lets you do is that it'll fan all those commands out into their own separate run spaces, which act sort of like threads or like jobs, if you're familiar with that. And it handles the whole process of fanning those out, waiting for it to complete, and then when it's complete, bringing the results back to the original pipeline and sending them on their way, as opposed to you having to do like start job and receive job and all that stuff. It just automates all that part of the process for you. And so it's pretty neat, but it does have a lot of caveats that you have to understand because it's doing that stuff in run spaces. It's not as easy to work with as just a simple for each object. All right, great.
When you were showing that sleep thing, you know, to iterate through there, if you would have put the actual command into a variable and gathered the stuff you needed into a variable, would it have processed faster or better, or where you can lay it out better?
So are you saying like just put $X in front of that whole command basically?
Yeah.
So what happens when you do that is it will process the exact same amount of time, because the pipeline is sort of like, it's an expression. You're saying, I want to do this thing. The variable assignment part only happens at the very end. So you know, if you know, and again, you just test it yourself, try it and see what happens. You'll see that it takes the same amount of time, but rather than the output going to the screen, it ends up going into the variable. You know, right. You can also use like the -out variable, similar to the pipeline variable for some commands to send the stuff to the variable that way. The nice thing about sending stuff to a variable, though, in that way, is that you don't have to, like, in your loop, do any of that kind of crazy stuff of like trying to do a plus equals to an array or anything like that. It'll just save all the results to the variable as an array ready to go, and it'll figure all that stuff out for you. But it won't make it any faster, just saving it to a variable. The only difference is that you just don't see the output like you would with a streaming result. That's a great question, actually, Bryce. So Bryce asks, why does piping or redirecting output using format table or format list, if you then pipe that to some other command, why is it a total mess? Do you know the answer to that, Chris?
Sorry, what was that again?
So Bryce asked basically, if you can show a good example is just take like something like get process and then pipe it into format table and then pipe that into something else and then see what happens.
Oh, well, yeah, if you format it before you pipe it to something else, it's no longer that object. You're dealing with just a bunch of output text.
Not exactly. It's still an object, actually.
Well,
and you can see this. So if you go ahead and just
so
try
you're
get
saying that it's going to be
get process, pipe that into FT, and pipe it into whatever, you know. Pipe that into like, I don't know, like a for each.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a good example that comes where like you're expecting, or like, I know, do something like select name, you know, where you're expecting like the name property.
Yeah, I mean,
you know, you get nothing but you're expecting it's a process, it's got a name. If you took the FT out of that, it works normal, right? So now try it without the FT.
Well, hang on a sec here. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
you figured
so
you're way ahead of me, Chris. So
you're not getting the process object type. So if you did, you know, for instance, if you do, let's see here. Let's see. Let's do this. So this is the type that you're getting. You're getting a process object type, right? And whenever you send this out to through format table, you're not getting the process type anymore. You're getting something else, some other object. I mean, everything is an object, right? But it's not going to be, you can't, it doesn't behave the same way. You're not going to be able to get access to the same members. So your members aren't going to be like name and whatever. These are just, I don't know, output streams or something. What is this?
Yeah, they're basically format objects.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, I could talk about this, but this is sort of like outside the scope of the thing. But part of it, again, it just comes to the thing of that what you see on the screen is not what it is. It's not text, it's actually objects. And what you're getting when you pipe through format table is you're getting special objects that know how to render it in a certain way. So you get the nice table, but in order to do that, they basically have to get rid of the old objects. And so that's why you get those unexpected results, is because you're not actually working with the object anymore. You're now working with formatting data. So if you want to actually use objects, typically what you want to do, like you might be using like format table to see certain properties, like you do format table like name, comma, ID for the example of a process. What you're probably wanting to do is you're actually wanting to use select instead of format table. What select will do is select basically, if you specify properties, what you get is you actually get brand new objects. Select will mint new objects with just those properties. And you'll see that if you do the same get member, you'll see that it's just a PS custom object, but only with the properties you asked for. But then your normal stuff like your format, your for each and stuff will work fine because you have an object that still has the properties that you were looking for. So anytime, basically, if you ever get this problem with format table, try replacing your format table with select and see if you get a better result.
I like how you said
Does that answer your
Andrew,
question, Bryce?
The filter left, format right. It's an elegant way to explain.
Yeah. And if you was to use the select dash object and pick out whatever you wanted out of that get process command, whatever you wanted, then you could pipe it over to FT, right?
Yeah. You always want to use FT as like the last thing. FT is like you want to output at the screen, but you should never want to do. And that goes for format lists, basically any of the format commands. Like you want it to be the last thing on anytime you're doing format, it should pretty much be the last line on your command. It's just a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, selecting is filtering, and you can kind of do that in line, kind of like we were doing before. We did the select the first one so that I didn't get 3 objects of process type to the pipeline, just got one of them. So you can filter in line, but once you change it, formatting changes. So if you have something that changes your output in any kind of way, you can't expect to for it to behave the same way and interact with the same way.
If you was to do this like in something like VS Code or something like that, you're used to your, when things are going right, when things are going good from left to right, and you put something like FT in the middle there, it'll give you a squiggly line or something, letting you know that that's not the correct, I guess, way to construct that, what you're trying to get.
Do they really have a script analyzer rule for that? I didn't know that.
I want to say it does, yeah.
Let me try it.
Like it won't let you mess up. It like lets you know something ain't right. It don't tell you. But
I didn't get it.
Yeah, okay. I might have been wrong by that.
I mean, you could certainly write a PS script, and that might be a little side project for me, is to write a PS script analyzer rule for that, because you certainly could.
Yeah.
I'll go harass Matthias, IS reset me, and I'll go tell him that I have the confident incorrect answer, and he'll just fix it because for his own ego.
Yeah, too bad we don't have it something in PowerShell to autocorrect, right?
Well, we actually do. If you use Visual Studio Code, you have the option to format on save, and you can have it just autocorrect all the script rules really nicely. I use it all the time. Like I write all my scripts with % and question mark as substitutes for for each and whereas, but as soon as I hit save in VS Code, it replaces them all with the correct aliases.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was talking about. Half the time I don't know what I'm talking about, so just don't worry about it.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? Anything in the library?
Just one question about it, how everybody uses pipelines when you're doing your scripts. I find that oftentimes when I'm writing a script, I'll default to sort of saving things in variables and then using the variable on the next line instead of pipelining. because I think it improves some readability. Sometimes if I pipeline too far, basically I've got a whole line of pipes, and then, you know, if someone coming behind me kind of looks at it and says, you know, what is this giant line of text?
Yeah, I kind of was saying that, Andrew, a while ago, by putting it in the variables. It's, you know, it makes that, for me, it makes it easier to read.
Yeah. I do that sometimes. The thing that I don't like about that method is that I can't just press the up arrow key one time and have it all there. So if I'm going to go the route where like I need something in a variable, I will make sure that whatever line I'm typing it on, I press Shift Enter so I can actually write the other commands afterwards. And then as I keep editing this and going back to it, I just press the up arrow key, press Enter, and it gets all my stuff back if I need to modify it. But I really like just kind of getting a function going, getting some working code from the terminal before taking it out.
So one thing that's also fun in PowerShell 7 is you get the you can do the Cousteau style pipelines, which I really like, where you can actually with your pipeline, you can actually put it on the pipeline character can be on a new line. And so rather than having it be at the end. And so it just ends up looking really, really nice. So you have something like, I'll just do it.
Yeah. I like those.
So there's like an example I just put in the chat where you get like this really nice kind of like you can see the pipeline and see how stuff flows through it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, for me, another big thing about pipelining, just from a performance perspective, is, you know, we talk about that whole streaming thing where stuff goes through the pipeline. And so a properly constructed pipeline actually minimizes the memory use, so that if you're working in a memory constrained environment like Azure Functions or Azure Automation, by using a pipeline, you can make sure that the data that's streaming in from one side and then streams out the other side, like stuff doesn't back up and then fill up all your memory. Most of the time, that's not a big deal, but like I have pipelines that work with hundreds of thousands of objects. And if I have anywhere in that pipeline that needs to see all of that information together, it's going to balloon my memory usage to the point that the function is going to crash because it's going to go outside the memory usage of that particular area. So it can be used for really being able to kind of streamline those. That's kind of a more niche case if you're doing really fancy stuff, but it's one thing to keep in mind when you're building pipelines versus using like stopping and using for eaches. Like I think I posted on, I see if I can find my tweet that I have, just like a ridiculous pipeline that I had where I like to build functions. You can build individual functions in a pipeline and then chain them all together for like an entire pipeline of work. So like I have one that creates basically 6,000 distribution groups based on all this different criteria for a customer. And the whole thing is basically just a full flowing streaming pipeline that runs through Azure Automation and heavily leverages for each parallel to keep it really fast. But the nice thing about the pipeline is as thing gets through each step, as those objects pass those steps, everything about that gets discarded. And so it keeps my memory usage low. And you can actually make these really cool without a lot of ceremony. You can make pipeline commands using a thing called filter. So rather than type function, you know, like function, whatever, filter is basically just a special keyword that your default block is the process block rather than the end block. So if you do something like filter, let's see, what's a good example for get process? We'll just do get process. I'll put it in the chat here real quick. We'll do filter. Well, here, I guess, anyone mind if I just take over the screen real quick and I'll just show an example?
Yeah, go for it. Also, while you're at it, show the Cousteau pipeline thing.
Yeah.
Someone was asking about readability, but also show the PS 5.1 version where it's at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You should be able to just start sharing, I think.
Okay. I've always forget that it's 2 clicks for. All right. Should be able to see that okay? Did I get the right screen? You see my VS Code?
Yep.
I'll blow it up a bit. Get it back to normal. No, I don't want Windows PowerShell, just normal PowerShell. All right, so up here, so we can, first of all, yeah, like I said, for readability, you know, typically you have things like, get process, select name. This is so there's that, which most people are used to seeing. So, but the problem with these pipelines, as mentioned for the readability, is that they can really run off the screen. And so, and by the way, just to demonstrate that thing I was talking about, I wrote it like that. But if I go to save or format document, fixes them all. So you can write short, but get them fast. So anyhow, I have, this can get really long and like you say, run off the screen and not very good for readability. So at least in PowerShell 5.1, you can do this. And this is a little bit better. Like, you can see each step and what's happening. If you want to do 5.1 and do something that is another way to do it, you can put backticks here, which I do not recommend, but it is an option. And you get that kind of style that we were talking about before, but you still have these ugly backticks you have to remember to take care of, and they can be really, really hard to see. But in PowerShell 7, you don't have to do any of that. In PowerShell 7, you can leave the backticks off. They updated the parser so that you can just do this. And you see it works just fine. Let me, as an example. So you can see you can input it the same way. And if you're just handwriting it, you should be able to bind to like Control Enter, I think it's Alt Shift Enter for me. I can't remember. Yeah. So you can still write them that way. You just use Shift Enter instead of doing the regular process. And you can still write them in this way if you want to. I generally don't do it this way at the command line, but you can still do it that way. And so you can see that's a lot more readable. But what you can also do is you can make these things called filter. And a filter is basically just a function block, but the process block is the default rather than the end block. So I can make a filter that says, show me the name. It's a terrible name, but we'll make it like a commandlet just for fun. And I can just take what would have been in my for each and do the same thing. And this is basically the same as if I had done this. Oops. Just like that. So this, basically this process, typically when you make a function, this is like this end block part is implicit. Like you can leave the end block off and it's just assumed if you don't define anything else that it's part of the end block. But if you make it a filter, it's the exact same as a function. It's just this part is now process is implicit. So if you take this out, now I have a function here. I can import that function. And rather than have this for each, I have my logic defined elsewhere. So I can do show me the name. And if I run this, I get the same result. So that's a neat way to very quickly define items that you can just have as part of your pipeline. And you can do all the other stuff too. You can do CMDlet bindings. You can do parameters. $type equals something. Try that. Where did I screw up? Oh, we'll put this up just in the top for fun. Put this below. There, process with something, and now I have my parameter. And in fact, since it's defined in the environment, it can already auto-complete it. And now I get cookies. So just a kind of fun little example of ways you can build things to go into the pipeline really simply without all the ceremony you usually need with like making a pipeline function. So you can see how you can take these and basically string them all together and have this like really readable of what's going on in your script. So you can have your main pipeline be really clear of like, get server name, fetch whatever, start server process, verify server process is running, send email. And just like you would have normal command lists you would use normally, but then you can take all that implementation stuff and then move it down into separate functions. So that, up here you can be like, this is my process, which is really obvious to somebody what's going on. And then if they want to know the details, like in VS Code, you can just control click and it'll take me down to my function down here where I define the details. Show that as a better example. Control click there. and I can see the details of what happens there, or I can even peek it. I can do that, and I can peek it. I can see, oh, okay, that's what this does.
Awesome.
So I've hijacked the conversation enough. I'll send it back.
No, thank you for showing that. We just got the 5-minute warning for our friends in the library because the library is closing. So I guess now's a good time to say thanks again to Chris. Thanks to everybody for attending. Thanks to everybody in Gainesville at the library for behaving and not getting us kicked out.
Not yet. We've got 5 more minutes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess if there's any more questions in the library for Chris, fire them away.
I actually enjoyed this a lot. I use the pipeline all the time. I feel like I understand it, right commandlets and stuff, or commands for it. But I learned quite a few new things today. So thank you, everybody. It's always fun topics like these.
Do we know where and when the video for this, for people like me who want to go back through it on their own and try some stuff, when it will be posted?
We'll work on getting it up there in the next couple of days. We have a YouTube channel. I guess I'll link that real quick. But yeah, I've gotten several messages asking when this will be available. So we'll definitely make sure to do what we can to get it up there quick for you. I mean, Zoom has been recording this whole time, so it shouldn't be too hard.
Okay.
YouTube link is coming.
I guess for the last minute, we never actually did do the for each parallel thing. So do that real quick.
There you go.
So if you haven't seen this is PowerShell 7 only, but it's really neat. So I have 1 for 10 for each object, print the object and sleep once. You see it's doing here 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can imagine this being like, you've probably done this, like if you've done like a for each on computers and stuff, you know, and let's leave out like invoke command and other things, which actually have some parallel stuff built into them. But typically for a command, you see that you run it, like you have to wait for each item to complete before it moves on. So sometimes it can be as simple now in PowerShell 7 as just adding dash parallel. And now when I run this, see, it does it in batches of 5. And so what it's doing behind the scenes is just taking every object that comes into the command, fanning it out into its own run space, letting it do whatever work it needs to do, which is the _sleep1, and then letting that result come back to the pipeline and move on as they come back in whatever order they're going to show up. So, you know, this is where like putting in a sleep random can help show that you're not always going to get the same results. I probably am not allowed to do that. Get random, min 1, max 5, just for fun. Oh, I don't think those should sometimes be out of order. That actually happened better than I thought it would. Why are these coming through so fast? Well, yeah, the point just being is that, you know, the objects might come back out of order. So you got to.
You're only getting 2 batches. Maybe if you broke it up to where you only did maybe 2 at a time, that would break it up in 5 batches instead of 2.
Well, this should actually in the full batch, it shouldn't pass them all the way through so fast. Like at least this. Oh, I know why. It's because my sleep. I'm already outputting the object before I've even done the sleep. That's why. That will fix it. There we go. So now you see the numbers come back random depending on how long they took. So keep that in mind, that if the order of the stuff that's coming back in is very important to be strict, you need to make sure to account for that. Either you need to sort, or you need to not use parallel, or you need to do something with those objects that come back to ensure that you handle the order. But if you don't care about the order, like you're just fanning out a command to a bunch of servers, or you're fanning out stuff to a bunch of CPUs, that's kind of just shows you a really easy way to do that. And so you see this command normally would take like 30 seconds. At this point, it's going to take at most generally 5 seconds because we're doing all 10 objects in parallel. And so they just come back as they come back. So super handy thing, new in PowerShell 7. You can do stuff like this in PowerShell 5.1 using a module called thread jobs, but that's the way it is. So I'll wrap it there.
Awesome. Well, I will.
There's your tease. Yeah.
Thank you to everybody who came out.